Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Civic Signal. This is Brandon and Sam, and today we're going to do another topical video where we discuss why America has two political parties, where it seems like other countries around the world have many more.
Yeah, and we're going to start with sort of a historical overview and then looking into the way that the institutions of the United States and the Constitution set up our electoral systems and the way that we interact with the government and how that adds to it. And then we'll have a discussion talking about, is this good? Is this bad? What are the pros, cons? What does this kind of look like in other areas of the world?
So, what's important about the American two-party system is that a, this is a pattern that has happened all throughout American history, and it even started before the United States was a country. In the colonial times, the colonists were split up into two parties, and they were basically the two major parties in Great Britain: the Tories, who were loyal to the king, and the Whigs or the Patriots, who were more interested in independence. And this pattern between the two parties lasted all the way until 1783, when Great Britain finally recognized the United States as an independent country, and the Tories basically fell apart in the United States. So, following the Tories and the Whigs or the Patriots, we have this system that started after George Washington was president. And we learned about this a lot in school, where you have the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And this system traded power between the two until the War of 1812, where the Federalists took the very unpopular position against the war. And then they kind of lost all of their support and kind of fizzled out as a party.
In 1824, the Democratic Republicans were the only major party running candidates nationally due to the unpopularity of the Federalists. So they ran four different candidates in 1824, and none of them took a majority of the Electoral College electorate votes. And so the House of Representatives elected the president, and they elected John Quincy Adams. And this was against the other three candidates, but mainly over Andrew Jackson. So this set up sort of this internal divide within the Democratic Republican Party. So those who were following Andrew Jackson split off and formed the Democrat Party, the Democratic Party. And this is the birth of the modern Democratic Party with Andrew Jackson as its first leader. And the other groups formed the Whigs. So this was the system for several years, not super long, only 25 years or so. But because the Whigs never really solidified their position on slavery, and ultimately because they couldn't build a strong coalition within their party of anti-slavery members, then they fell out of the national spotlight once slavery became the dominant issue in the 1850s, and it really became the Democrats versus the Republicans came up under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln as the new major party, which was ultimately the anti-slavery party. And there have been a lot of realignments within the parties. I mean, ultimately, if you look at different decades, the party divides are not always just based on race or slavery. We see them switched to be about labor issues, immigration issues, monetary policy issues, and social policy issues. Things changed a lot between 1854 and the present, but these ultimately have been our two main parties since that time.
So, why has American politics been dominated by two-party systems forever? And really, this comes down to the idea from a French political scientist named Maurice Duverger. And he developed this theory called Duverger's law. And it's not really a law in the same way that scientific laws are so universal and there's rarely ever exceptions. There are some exceptions to Duverger's law, but it does a very good job at explaining why America specifically has two major parties. And ultimately, Duverger's law states that the system of government and elections in the United States is what leads to the outcome of two parties.
Right. Well, when we look to the Constitution, it very clearly lays out the system for how the federal government is going to be organized. Many of the state governments have sort of adopted that same system into their constitutions. So, what we're looking at here is the idea of what we call single member districts, which is that for each district that elects a member to the House of Representatives, or when it's a whole state voting on a senator, in each election, there's one person who gets elected, right? So only one person can be representing a geographic area at one time in a certain body. And well, for the Senate, there's two, but they're elected separately. And then we have what we call plurality voting, which is essentially it's just the first person who gets the most votes wins. There's a system of runoff elections in some areas where you get rid of candidates who had less votes and then you just put up the two that had the most votes. But for the most part, if you get the most votes, you win, and you're the guy, you're the woman representing that area.
So Duverger's law has two main mechanisms for why it works. And the first mechanism is really simple, where because the candidate with the most votes wins, the threshold for victory disadvantages small parties. Because a small party who doesn't have a lot of support is never going to be able to beat a larger party if it's just the largest number of votes wins. So this actually disincentivizes small parties from running in major elections because their chance of winning is really low. And the second mechanism is kind of a psychological mechanism from the voters, where voters look at the system and they look at the small parties who are competing against the large parties, and they realize that if they vote for a small party who doesn't have a very high chance of winning, they're basically throwing away their vote. And if they actually want to have a say in who wins, they need to vote for the larger parties. And so this psychological mechanism leads to a phenomenon called strategic voting. And strategic voting basically leads to the number of competitive parties in any given election is going to be M plus one, where M is the number of seats available. So like what Sam was saying, in America, we have single member districts. So the number of seats available is only ever one. So that means that M plus one equals two. There are only going to be two major parties in any given race. And this is kind of like a game theory explanation where if you have one party, you're going to have no competition. So any additional party is going to be able to win anyone not satisfied with that one party. But if you have three parties, one of those three is going to be the smallest. And so people are going to leave that smallest party to have more say with their vote by voting with the two. And so that's why in America, we have two major parties in any given election.
Within the American system of only two major parties, we run into this issue where not 50% of the people are perfectly aligned with each other, and then the other 50% are perfectly aligned with each other. So we have what we call big tent parties. And so these are broad platforms that cover a large coalition of different opinions that ultimately don't perfectly represent any one person's opinions, but that gather enough interests from different groups and different ideas that they bring together these coalitions of people who have enough in common with each other that they'd rather vote for that party over the other. We see this within the parties today where different people have different issues that matter the most to them, whether that's a social policy, an economic policy, a foreign policy. And not everybody within the Republican Party agrees on every single issue strongly with the platform. Same thing with the Democratic Party. There are issues that they care more about, and whether that's in a more extreme direction than the party takes it or in a moderate direction than the party takes it. But they have to gather these huge coalitions because ultimately, if there's only going to be two competitive people, if you can gather the biggest coalition, then you can get the most votes. And so the parties are incentivized to have these broad coalitions and ultimately strike this balance between getting a more moderate platform so that you get more people within the moderates, but not becoming so moderate that the people with really strong opinions to the more extreme want to leave your party.
And so, like Sam was saying, this results in ideological conflict within parties because there's a broad range of opinions within both major parties. And so this makes the United States' system different than systems that have many parties, where ideological conflict actually happens within party instead of between parties. And like Sam was saying, this leads to positions converging to both the median or the middle position within the party. But then also, in order to win elections, you have to move that position as close as you can to the middle of the general public to try to win the most votes from the middle while maintaining support from your side.
Now, a lot of the discussion surrounding this single member district two-party system within the United States, especially if you look online, is very negative. People really don't like the way that this is. But I think it's important to frame this in the context of how other system works and the potential negatives and the real negatives of other systems as well. For example, within the two-party system, people are very incentivized not to go to the extremes. And I know that there have been extremist members of the parties within the United States who have been platformed and have been elected to office. In other countries, where more small parties are given seats within the parliament or within their Congress, you have this issue where there will be a party that has a totally extreme platform who elects a member, and there's nobody who they have to moderate for. Where within these different parties in the United States, when you have a person who may hold more extreme views within the party platform, there's still an incentive for them to gather more support from their party generally and the more median people. If we look at Greece, during the financial crisis, there was actually a member of the Nazi party was elected. This is the 2000s. A member of the Nazi party was elected in Greece to their parliament. Another example of this is within the Israeli system, a lot of people from smaller parties get elected, and those smaller parties have to be included in the coalitions of government. And so you see more extremist parties being platformed and having their members within the parliament be given higher positions within the government, because without that, then it's impossible to form a stable coalition. You don't have this going on within the United States, where these big tent parties are trying to moderate and are trying to put forward electable candidates. They're not forced to include these extremist people who have no incentive to be broadly appealing.
And building off that, the two-party system is much more stable than other systems of government and elections. First of all, it simplifies vote choice for the voters because they only have to learn two parties and the current platforms of those two parties. Second of all, and this is specific to the United States and other countries where there are single member districts that are elected through plurality systems, is you have regularly scheduled elections where the people themselves can elect the executive authorities in the government. Some of these other systems where you have proportional representation or specifically parliamentary systems, the legislature itself and the many parties in that legislature are the ones who need to form a coalition to gain some kind of majority threshold to then elect a government and establish a prime minister, for example. But if at any point that coalition falls apart or they lose support to the point where they don't have a majority, that triggers a new election and the entire government changes over.
Right. And so you only have elections coming in the face of instability rather than here. It's more randomized how well the government's going to be doing around election time because the elections are so consistently placed. Now, this isn't to say that our two-party system is perfect. We just wanted to highlight the fact that other systems are also not perfect. There are definitely cons. You have people who would prefer to vote for a smaller party who has a platform that more perfectly aligns with their own views. When you have more small parties, the likelihood that one is going to represent your views very closely to what you hold is going to be increased. So you have a greater ability to be represented by someone who looks and sounds more like your opinions.
Another con with the two-party system is the disenfranchisement of moderates. People in the middle, they feel like neither party fully represents them. And so they're stuck choosing between a lesser of two evils kind of situation, where an advantage of the two-party system is it forces extremists to moderate. Sometimes the two-party system forces moderates to polarize. And when the two parties drift farther and farther apart, like some people complain that is happening in the United States right now, the moderates are forced to polarize even farther, and it can create an unhealthy balance in the electorate and in society. So another thing that is worth mentioning is the fact that this system of two parties in the United States is very unlikely to change. Like we argued earlier, the system is set up to incentivize two big tent parties. Additionally, these two big tent parties are incentivized to maintain the status quo because, first of all, in history, we saw that a lot of the parties lost power because they fractured and they split up into multiple parties. And second of all, these two parties have created laws that create very high thresholds for smaller parties to get into debates or to get onto ballots, whereas the Democrats and the Republicans tend to automatically qualify for those things.
Right. The way that the system is set up is not just our sort of historical heritage, but it's ingrained within the Constitution. Again, going back to Duverger's law, part of the reason that it is the way it is because of the way that the system is set up. Not only is changing the Constitution in any way, putting forth an amendment and having it actually pass, very difficult, but if you're going to do it in a way that limits the power of the current parties, that's going to be very unpopular within the leadership of the parties and within the members of Congress and the president, these sorts of people who really have to get behind constitutional amendments. And the very politically active people often very strongly associate themselves with a party. And so you're going to not have the support of a lot of very politically active people. And so changing this would be next to impossible. So I would consider the two-party system here either to stay or to stay for a very long time. Well, thank you for watching, everybody. We had a lot of fun making this episode and talking about it with each other before we filmed. We hope that you learned something. We'd love to hear your thoughts either on the two-party system, on the way that other governments do it, or how you think this is a good or a bad thing down in the comments. Any ideas you have for any future videos, and we will see you next time on the Civic Signal. Well, thanks everybody for watching. I hope you like my haircut, and I hope you like Brandon and I.